Upon my first read-through of Mistborn Era 1, I never really questioned the initial impression I got from the Lord Ruler. He was the big baddie, the evil emperor that the heroes must defeat to save the world. And at first it absolutely seemed that that's what's happening. But if you finish the trilogy, you probably know there were a lot more logical reasons behind his actions than what was first apparent. And you'd be forgiven for just lumping him in with evil overlords like Sauron or Voldemort. He completely fits the bill on a superficial level. When we first hear of him, he's this dictator who unified the world under a single empire by force. He's worshipped as a god by the people, and his rule is enforced by a particularly nasty group of monsters called the Inquisitors. He even goes so far as to kill Calcia in cold blood and holds public executions to remind people of his ultimate will. He is incredibly powerful and cannot be spoken out against. Sounds completely evil and reprehensible, I know. Even considering how he came to power, he killed the legendary hero of ages who was to save the world from destruction. He killed the Chosen One and stole the power for himself. Even before being the ruler of the world, he was pretty much a scumbag, right? Well, he certainly isn't a saint. But if you look closely, you'll see he was less evil and more ruthlessly practical. He did all of this for the greater good of humanity, even if it meant he'd have to do what many would consider monstrous. But to illustrate, let's examine the many things the Lord Ruler did and what his motives were behind it. His first act was to kill the hero of ages and steal the power for himself. On the surface, this looks terrible. But he did this because it was discovered that humanity had been misled to believe that by the hero giving up their powers, they would save the world from destruction. Unfortunately, it turned out that by doing so, they would actually doom the world and release an ancient force named Ruin that would destroy everything. Rashek, as it was then called, killed the hero Elendi and took the power for himself, thus thwarting Ruin's plan and saving the world. Next, he took that power and tried to move the planet closer to the sun in order to burn away the mists that were threatening to end all life. Unfortunately, he was unskilled with the power and moved it too close. Fearing he'd mess it up further by moving it back, he created the ash mounts that would cover the world in a layer of ash and the sky in perpetual clouds to shield the world from the burning sun. He even adapted humans to be able to breathe in the ash at no detriment to their health, and changed the biology of plants to thrive in the ashy environment. He then had the foresight to develop new microbes that would break down the ash to keep it from burying everything. Finally, he terraformed the world so that the well that held all that power he took would no longer be up in the mountains, but rather in a cavern below what would eventually become his palace. This way he could keep an eye on it and repeatedly use the power to keep Ruin at bay. And this was all done in the first few moments after he was given the power, all in an attempt to save the world. From there, his ruthless practicality would be written across history. He gave himself allomancy, which he then used with his feruchemy to give himself what would be practically immortality. This way he would be able to ensure he could always keep himself around to keep humanity going. Ruin had already nearly convinced the world into doing what would release it once before. He would not let that happen again. Now immortal, he knew that having multiple different kingdoms, each with their own agendas and ideals, would not work. All it would take would be one rogue kingdom to seek the power of the well, and all his work could be undone. So he did the most practical thing he could. He conquered the world and built his own empire, the final empire, where he could with absolute certainty keep humanity afloat. In order to accomplish this great feat, he created a great army of hulking, powerful beasts called Colossus. These monstrosities were practically unmatched on the battlefield and ensured him his victory over all kingdoms. Knowing he would also require spies to ensure he could sniff out any dissent, he created his spies called the Kandra. These creatures could imitate any person in the world with 100% accuracy, from the way they looked to their mannerisms and a deep knowledge of their history. If you did not know if the person you spoke to was a spy for the Emperor, you were much less likely to try and hatch any conspiracies. He even changed the genetics of the normal populace for practicality. The nobility were created more intelligent, slimmer, taller, and less fertile to ensure only a few heirs to their family estate. The peasantry were made slower, shorter, sturdier, and more fertile to birth as many potential laborers as possible. This was the first of the Scar. Okay, so you have an empire with absolute military might. You've genetically altered your populace to best suit the tasks you need of them, and even changed the ecology of the world to survive in this environment you've made. You've even placed a well of power below your palace that you could use to keep things running smoothly every time it filled. Great! But how do you get the people to go along with it? How do you make sure that all the people you rule, from the noblest lords to the lowest beggar, continue to stay loyal to you and not only follow you, but revere you and thank you for all you've done? Simple. You become their god. The Lord Ruler was clearly a master at manipulating the populace and knowing exactly what he'd have to do to ensure the future of his reign. He established his own religion with himself as the god, with it being the state-mandated religion and enforced by the terrifying Steel Inquisition. He ensured the entire world considered him a god above their mortal understanding. Of course he ruled the world. He was a god and he knew what was best for everyone. It's no surprise he became known as the Sliver of Infinity. With his own empire secured and his religion instilled in the mind of the population, the Lord Ruler had only one thing that would still stand in the way of the future of his reign and the salvation of the human race. The past. Yes, the past was one of the last threats. The past would point to flaws in his rules. The past would prove he wasn't a god, but rather a murderer who stole the power meant for another. The past would prove his religion was new and fabricated. The past would undermine everything. So he cleansed the past from existence. All records of other religions were destroyed. All records of the days before the final empire were either changed or wiped out. His scribe created new histories and littered his existence throughout. No record of the past was allowed without his express approval. He rewrote history and was undermined in this attempt only by the few Terraceman ferrochemists who still saved the knowledge of the past where he could not get it. In every conceivable way, Rashek, the Lord Ruler, ensured stability for the world. He ensured he would be around to keep ruin at bay and ensured that nobody under his rule would have to face the power of the destructive force that yearned to undo the world. He even ensured fully stocked supply caches were kept in multiple different locations should he still somehow fail. He had some form of backup plan in place to help humanity survive should he fail in his task to protect it. The Lord Ruler was ruthless, yes. He left a bloodbath in his wake as he seized control of the world, and he mercilessly silenced any who stood in opposition to him. But he did all of this with the express intent to protect humanity from certain doom. Can an argument be made that his extreme practicality was often cold and callous, that he often exceeded the necessary amount of force and perhaps even took pleasure in his subjugation of the world? Perhaps. But you cannot deny that he did what he did for the greater good and because he saw it as the most practical and efficient means to an end. Would he have been able to keep ruin at bay forever? I guess we'll never know, but we do know he tried his best to do what he could for his people. And I don't think I could ever really consider that evil. But that's just my opinion. If you agree or disagree with me, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your opinions. But that's been it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video and I'll see you next time.